Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look. Well, hello everybody. Stewart Best here, your host, and we have Larry Taylor and Richard Shaw with us tonight. We hope to have I know we're going to have a bang-up show on all kinds of subjects that are not only paranormal in some ways, but very, very important. Richard, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you very much for having me on, Stewart.
Oh, no problem. Larry, are you?
Thank you.
You're still here, right?
I'm still here, and thanks for having me with you and Richard. Should be a great show.
I think so too. Where do you want to start? Where do we start? You, Richard. How did you get into this thing with the Watchers and the Torah codes? What was your? How do I say this? What was your interest? How did you get into it? I mean, I've been a documentary producer for a number of years, and I know how I got into it. What was your basic interest? What brought you into this?
Wow, it's a loaded question. In fact, I'm writing a book about the Torah codes and how it all happened, because it's such a bizarre notion, and I know a lot of people have heard it, but I did it in greater detail in the book because it was just so strange. But I could take an hour explaining it, but I'll do like the thumbnail sketch version.
Okay.
Back in 2006, I had been into a studio in Hollywood for about a year, and I had just started Pinlight, my company, production and post house, in 2005. And a good friend of mine, Lee, came over, and we just started talking. And he was just about ready to leave on a trip to Japan to co-produce a concert for Ricky Lee Jones. And so the two of us at the time were embarking on a project called the Words Project, where we were taking rap artists and working with them. And it was a really interesting and wonderful project where we met a lot of really incredible people. But it was a documentary, and we started talking about what we might want to do in the future. And I said, well, I've always had this interest in the Bible codes, and I just never have seen a documentary done quite the way that I would like to do one. Not that any of the other ones were bad. It's just that I felt like most of them leaned too heavily on the Michael Drosnin tables that he did in his first book. Mm-hmm. So I was more interested in knowing, what are the world experts really doing? I mean, what are these guys up to? What are they like? What are their personalities like? You know, what's it like to talk to one of them? I mean, that to me was more interesting. And some of the stuff that I had seen had very short clips with them, so you really didn't get to know them very well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, of course, what I thought they were doing was really interesting. The fact that there was this mathematical code in a 3,300-year-old text really intrigued me, and that it was provable, and that you could look it up on a computer and look up people's names. And some people at the time thought it was even good for making predictions, which is a very that's kind of a dubious art. We don't know. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So you don't want to use them for that. But so anyway, Lee gets on a plane and heads off to Japan. I go back to work in the studio. He gets home about 10 days later and decides to visit his brother in New York. And his flight was canceled due to bad weather. Now, the flight was from LAX to LaGuardia, which takes about 5 hours. So a couple of days later, they put him on another JetBlue flight. He gets on the plane, and his random seat assignment put him next to this guy that looked like a rabbi. Well, that man happened to be Professor Robert Haralick from City University of New York, the guy that worked with all of the world Torah code experts and was writing software for it. So when they landed in LaGuardia, Lee tossed the phone to Robert, and I was connected with this guy, at which point I had no idea what I was going to do. But that's how it all started. I had nothing to do with it other than just having a conversation with my friend. Next thing I know, I'm connected with the world experts. When
Sounds
things
like
that happen to you, yeah, when things like that happen to you, you have to go, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do something about this. And you just proceed down that path. You know, that's all you can do, because there's a guiding hand much bigger than yours involved. And if it's supposed to happen, then it'll happen. And actually, it took years, but eventually it did. So that's how I got started in the Torah codes. In that process, I was doing a demo for the Torah codes back in 2009, and I called it Torah Codes 2012 because I was curious to see what the Torah code said about the year 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured that if there was something in there to the codes, then there might be something to it. If not, it was all baloney. Or that we didn't understand what 2012 was all about and why all the hoopla about it. The Mayan calendar or the end of the world, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I had listened to this guy on the radio. This answers your watcher's question. In 2007, I heard this guy on Coast to Coast AM by the name of L.A. Marzulli. And L.A. was talking about his new book, which was new at the time, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural. I thought he was a really interesting guy. I'd never heard anyone quite explain some of these things in the same way, and weirdly, I was having these same thoughts of my own and having really not expressed them to very many people because most people just didn't get it. It was like it just seemed too sci-fi or too off the wall. Mm-hmm. But what's strange is a lot of the stuff that we interpret in the Bible is very sci-fi, and except for the fact it was like a first-hand account of what was going on and explained in 2,500-year-old language that is very confusing to us today to read.
Yes.
You know, if we were looking at the same thing now, we'd go, oh, it's a spaceship. Or, oh, there's plasma forming under the ship. Or, oh, I mean, these things now are well known. We're well acquainted with this phenomenon. But back in those days, they didn't know what to call anything. Well, anyway, I did something I never did, and I felt that if I didn't do it, I was going to be in big trouble. And that was I needed to contact L.A. Marzulli and take him to lunch. Now, I have never in my life, and haven't since, heard someone on the radio and gone to that kind of effort to take a person I didn't even know to lunch. I felt it was important I do that. I can't tell you why, but I did it, okay? We ended up getting along really well. And so in 2009, I called up L.A. I said, hey, what do you know about the Torah codes? He said, well, not all that much. It hasn't been my area of study. I said, well, could you come and comment about what you think about them? And he said, sure. Because L.A. is quite a scholar, knows an awful lot about Scripture. So I figured, well, this would be a guy other than just a rabbi that I could interview and get kind of like a normal American point of view on what he thinks of the Bible code. So I called him over to my studio, and this was the first time I'd ever filmed him. And I thought he did really well on camera. So I kind of tucked that in the back of my mind. Well, a year later, I get this phone call from L.A., and he calls me and says, would you direct a show about UFOs for me? And I thought about it for a minute and asked him what the budget was. It was incredibly small. I figured, well, maybe he wants just like a 15 to 20-minute show or something. I said, how long does it need to be? He said, an hour. And I'm going, okay. But I'm thinking, okay, this is L.A. I know where he's coming from. I know his level of expertise. This is a subject that really interests me. And darn it, I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to possibly do it for that kind of money, but I will somehow pull it off. And after I agreed to do it, I hung up the phone, and Joel went down my back going, how the heck where am I going to get footage of UFOs? Who are we going to interview? I mean, I had no idea how we were going to pull this off on such a small budget. All I had was a camera, which actually was my friend Lee's camera at the time that he was loaning me. I had editing equipment and all of that, but I didn't have a camera.
Mm-hmm.
So we used this. It was a Canon XLH1 HD camera. We went out and took that out and filmed the show. Basically, I did everything. I filmed it, edited it, helped LA to be comfortable on camera. And at this point, he introduced me to Dr. Roger Lear. Now, this was the guy who was the expert on alien implants.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And I'm sort of going, okay, we're getting into alien implants. Now, that really, I mean, UFOs seem incredibly credible to me. For some reason, UFOs, I've never had a problem with it. I just felt, okay, we have UFOs. Next. You know? To me,
right,
it's like,
right.
I don't get what the big deal is. UFOs have been seen for decades and been seen by thousands of people. So I don't see why people have to be ridiculed to talk about such a phenomenon. But alien implants were really, really strange. I mean, that was like, I don't know, that's like we're getting into Bigfoot. Now that I'm into Bigfoot, I don't think it's nearly as strange as I used to think. So anyway, we go over to Roger's office, and I instantly liked him and discovered that this guy was a consummate scientist, no-nonsense individual. And then he plopped an implant in my hand in a little vial, and I'm holding an implant here, and I'm going, okay, now it's really getting creepy. And this started a relationship with Roger that lasted until he died, which was in March 2014. The two of us became very close. Mm-hmm. I loved talking with Roger. So anyway, that was the beginning of my Watchers involvement with L.A. Marzulli, and it goes on to this day. We're working on Watchers 10 currently. I've been working on it all day. So there you go. Sorry it took me so long.
Oh, no problem. I was curious because it's always interesting to find out how these things happen, because the hand of the Lord is obvious in this, that he wanted you involved in both areas.
Well, they kind of intertwined. Yeah, I mean, what was strange to me, too, is I met Rabbi Glazerson, who I dearly love to this day. I didn't ever imagine getting to know some of these Torah code experts as well as I do, and kind of feeling as if they're family at this point. Mm-hmm. But Glazerson is a brilliant guy and opened up a whole vista to me of ancient mystical Jewish stuff that I had never heard about before. Now, you can look at it as, well, okay, this is the third-party Torah expose on what was going on during the time of Moses. Okay, I get that. But they have these other sources like the Zohar and the Talmud and the Kabbalah and all of these other sources. Now, while we're not saying that this is scripture, nevertheless, some of these references are weirdly prophetic. And I mean, as I've been going through this stuff for the past 10 years now with various rabbis and professors, I do have this sense that, and this is my opinion, but that God has his hand on certain Jewish rabbis, certain individuals, and uses them in various ways. Now, this is not something that's conventionally taught in Christian churches, and some Christians are really opposed to it. And I've just learned over the years that that's wrong. I mean, we need to be, if anything, we need to kind of rediscover our roots that goes clear back to the time of Moses and go, okay, let's reevaluate some of these things we thought we knew, because we might be all washed up in some of these areas.
Yeah, we are, I think. I mean, when you really stop and look at it, the Bible prophecies about apostasy, I've always thought that if you really are a Christian, for example, you better have a very open heart and a very open mind, and you better be ready to look at anything that the Lord shows you.
I think so. I believe that's true.
So that's incredible. So I saw part of this battle going on here. I don't know if you want to get into that or not, but what struck me is if you're doing something that's truthful, you're going to come under attack right away. And it seems to me like that maybe that's what's going on in this. It's kind of a spiritual warfare thing over the authenticity of the Bible codes. And these guys that I've talked to Larry because Larry knows them. I've never talked to any of them, but they're not going to do anything other than interpret or put out, or I should say point out, this is what it says. Take it or leave it.
Well, yeah, I mean, were you also referring to the Ray L debacle that's going on right now? Yeah,
I don't know how anybody could even believe that what they're claiming. I mean, my own opinion is when he shows up, the whole world's going to know it. There's not going to be any question about it.
I totally agree. In fact, I would like, if I saw Ray L, I would ask to see the nail holes.
That's good. That's good.
So, how do I word this? In your relationship with these rabbis, what is their actual opinion on these Bible codes? I mean, how do they interpret it? What do they actually feel about what they've found out? I mean, these guys are pros at it. They're mathematical geniuses, basically.
Well, yeah, some of them, I mean, especially like Professor Eliyahu Rips is a very special, very brilliant individual that I can't even believe I know him as well as I do. I mean, he just, what's he doing even talking with me? But I've had some really wonderful moments with him, not nearly enough because we're separated by great distances. But what's been interesting is Rabbi Glazerson has taken a real interest on my documentary work on the Torah and sees no problem if he feels motivated to jump on a plane and come visit me. I mean, he just does that. He does it often. I mean, I can't believe he does it, and I'm impressed that he does it.
Yeah, there's a love bond there between you guys.
Well,
and
I think the world
you implicitly. Yeah.
And we were recently on Skywatch TV with Derek Gilbert, and what's really strange, and I didn't expect this. I just thought it would. I called Derek up because he just had me on the show. That show won't air until June. But since I had just been to Missouri and had asked to be on the show, I called him up and said, look, unexpectedly, Rabbi Glazerson flew in today. And if you want, we can introduce him to your audience. I could just from my studio. He goes, oh, that'd be great. So I didn't know if he'd want to do it or not. And, this was nothing fancy. This was just out of my Mac in my studio here, and I put a couple chairs up in front of the screen, and Glazerson and I did the show, and Derek wrote me back a couple of days later saying that show has gone to #1 on Skywatch of all the shows aired that month.
Wow.
Which was like something I didn't ever expect to have happen. I mean, it's gotten, I guess, well over 100,000 hits already. And it's been on Roku and YouTube and everything else. And, of course, some of the controversies surrounding these things, I'm sure you guys are well acquainted with the vitriol and some of the
yes.
statements that are made on the internet lately, very ignorant statements from people who have no idea what they're talking about, but it's almost like whoever yells the loudest is the one that has the information. And it's disturbing to me to some extent. I mean, I don't let it get to me, but I'm thinking, man, how could a person with so little knowledge, obviously, when I read it, say these things? But people just do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's part of the times in which we live.
Well, and I think also they're safe in their room. They'd never come to your door, knock, and speak to you that way.
And it's also like the kind of thing that L.A. and I discuss. You know, when we do a film, say we do something on the elongated skulls in Peru, or we're trying to do research regarding the Nephilim, we have all of these people criticizing what we're doing, and yet none of those people that I know of, maybe one, has ever gone to Peru, ever walked through the graveyards, ever taken samples, ever done any DNA testing, ever done anything. And meanwhile, we're working our butts off to try to get as much information out there about this as we can. Now, it's like we don't have all the answers, but I think that some of these things are starting to open up a little bit. And Watchers 10, I think, is going to have a lot more answers than we've had in the past, because we've been at this for a long time now. And I'm anxious to get this film out in June or July. It just depends on how fast we can get some of the information back.
Well, this crystal skull thing is very interesting in view of the fact that Indiana Jones movie dealt with it. And the Mayan elders, if I recall, went from New York to L.A. and made various stops along the way about the crystal skulls, and you know, so you have all this sort of occult activity going on. But my point would be, all right, why did it surface when it surfaced? So yes, it does deserve research to find out what's really going on.
Well, I think that, at least this is an opinion that I hold, that we're about to see supernatural things emerge on this planet again in the near future. I really think that people are going to go, oh, okay, we've seen that in the movies, or we've seen, you know, almost like Hollywood and some of the producers there are prepping our country in advance for something that's imminently on the way. Now, a lot of people think that, and I don't want to give the people in Hollywood too much credit for knowing more than they think they know, because I've talked to some producers that working on pretty current stuff, and their idea for aliens and all of that, a lot of it is derived mostly on the work of Zecharia Sitchin, and the panspermia concept seems to them to be more of a valid thing than just poof, well, here we are, you know, that kind of thing. And really, I really can understand that. I mean, okay, I get that. I mean, that does make sense. And actually, I thought that, and you know, I get into a lot of controversial stuff here, but one thing that we had always hoped to do with Watchers is just not make it a Christian show, because once you do that, and I have to say, a lot of the Christian programming out there, with the exception of a very few, are an embarrassment to me, and do not really help us at all, because they don't really talk about anything meaty enough, and all the shows look like wedding videos to me. It's like they're just boring as heck, you know, and it's like, why would I watch this? Where's the gutsy gist of the Bible in this show? Where's the stuff that's supposed to happen now? You know, it's like there isn't any of that stuff. In fact, we've been told by some networks that they wanted their network to be, I quote, a soft landing pad for Christians to come to watch. And I said, well, if you're airing Watchers, that ain't it.
Well, that's it. But they don't want the real truth.
Well, right, and I think some people are saying it's time to splash some cold water into the church's face and go, "Hey, guys, wake up."
Oh, I agree, actually, with that. I don't know if you can find anything that will wake them up. I mean, apostasy is apostasy. And you start talking about UFOs, you talk about the arrival, you talk about aliens and contact and all that, and then these are probably fallen angels for the most part. All you get is rolled eyes and glaze comes down over their eyes, and you've lost them already. So You're probably right if you make this more or less as kind of a cross between, okay, it's got Christian stuff in it, or biblical stuff, I should say, and secular stuff in it. You're delving into the highways, the byways, like the Lord says. You know, they were all invited to the wedding, but they RSVP'd and said they wouldn't come, or they would come later, and they never show up. So what does he say? Go out to the highways and the byways. So really, I know a lot of the stuff that I have put out is more secular than religious.
Well, I think that's good, though. I think we have to take a different approach here. The sweaty-faced evangelist pacing back and forth like a lion on the platform to a crowd of people that are falling asleep in the congregation is no longer working.
Yes.
And it has to be, people want to feel involved somehow. And, you know, also, none of the really good stuff, the cool stuff in the Scripture is ever taught in churches. Or rarely.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, no, not at all.
And most of it is because, well, we've got this massive building here. We have a air conditioning budget of, $1,500 a month. We've got parking problems. How are we going to get busing in here to get people into the church? Who's going to handle this service? Who's going to provide special music? And it's all wrapped up into this whole thing that becomes a completely political movement at a certain point. And it's like, that's not church. What is that? I don't know. Meanwhile, there's all these amazing things that we read about in Scripture that no one ever discusses. And why aren't we discussing it? That's why people aren't coming to church, because they hear the same salvation message every week, or they've heard stuff that they've heard a long time before, or they'll go through the book of John for, 10 weeks, or, it's this kind of stuff that you saying there's anything wrong with the book of John or these other passages, but there's a lot of cool stuff that we're just completely ignoring. And now I think we're starting to see it.
Well, you can hide stuff only so long, and then they're going to be forced to look at it. I mean, it's UFOs, like you say, have been around for centuries. Well, how do you explain that? Well, the Bible explains it pretty well. When getting back to the codes, the last one that I saw that was about Nibiru. Can you get into that a little more? What they actually have found on that in Planet X?
Well, yeah, there's this. Glazerson and I have had a lot of discussions about Nibiru. We've done tables together for years on the subject. And when I say we, I'll sometimes make a suggestion because they say, look, here's what everybody's talking about. Maybe you can do a table about such and such a thing. And I will make a gentle suggestion because I know what he wants to look up, and that's anything about the Messiah. I mean, this is a guy who's, I remember talking to Rabbi Perry once, who's a good friend of mine, and I said, what's really cool every time I meet with you guys is that as soon as we get together, we're talking about God. There's no preamble, there's no fooling around. And he goes, well, what else is there?
Exactly.
Good. But it's really, I mean, when they talk about it, it's from a depth that is really impressive and full of insight. And sometimes I think the Christian community, and not to put the Christian community down at all, because I'm part of that, but I think we've come off the rails a little bit and just kind of ignoring our Jew and trying to find out, look, we need to all pull together and figure out what the heck is going on right now. Now, there's stuff in the New Testament that they don't know about, and there's stuff in the Tanakh and in ancient mystical texts we don't know about. Or if we have studied it, we may not understand what the ancient Hebrew says on something like Glazerson would. I mean, here's a great example of that. We were talking one afternoon in the studio, and we were talking about, I said, well, when it talks about the parting of the Red Sea, and he goes, it never says the Red Sea parted. I said, what? He said, no, the original Hebrew says the waters parted. I said, okay, so what does that mean? He said, that means waters plural. I said, okay, so what does that mean? He said, it meant all the waters, all over the world. Now, that's something no one ever says in church. And it's something L.A. and I have discussed. And L.A. said, but it says that God took a wind and blew the waters. Yes, but there was something else going on at the same time, because you could blow as much air as you want across a body of water, and it's just going to kind of flail away, and nothing's going to happen. So there were two things going on there, in my opinion, at the same time, and the wind was part of it. And in Immanuel Velikovsky's book, Worlds in Collision, it talks about the North American Indians saying that the oceans stood up. Now, this is right around the same date that the Red Sea parted.
Yes.
And I believe somewhere it talks about hailstones, 100-pound hailstones falling on the earth in the book of Revelation. Well, the Indians said 100-pound hailstones fell on them during the time that the Red Sea parted and that the ocean stood up. So there was an astronomical event going on, which I believe held the earth still for a few hours, actually kept it from turning, and really did a number on our gravitational pull. And so the waters didn't know how to lay down anymore. They were just kind of going, now what do we do? I really kind of think that's what was going on.
Yeah, if it stood still, you've got the four corners and the winds where the water kind of piles up because of the winds. Well, if the wind stopped, then the oceans would kind of flop out of their basin. And I guess the only other scenario would be a slight crustal shift of some sort.
Well, yeah, I mean, there could have been everything, but then there's other theories that the Earth came to a very slow stop, so it wasn't just like, and then all the continents go flying into the distance. But there are scriptures in the Bible that we've never understood. It says, and the mountains and the islands fled away and could not be found. I mean, when you do something like that, that's a drastic change of direction, a different inertia. Book of Isaiah talks about the earth shall be turned upside down. Malachi talks about there shall not be a root or a branch left to them, talking about the wicked people on the earth, because everything will be burned to a crisp. Now, that has yet to have happened, that part. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think there's something to the whole Nibiru thing, even to the fact where even L.A. and I tend to disagree, as good friends that we are, I said, look, to me the whole Nibiru thing doesn't seem weird or crazy at all. We don't understand everything going on in our universe, first of all. Secondly, apparently it's done this before and has come by the Earth on multiple occasions, and depending on what its orbit was like, either the Earth was messed with hugely, or you could see it and the earth was still okay. It just depends on how, and this is the same thing Gil Broussard believes happened. And there's only like a handful of guys that are really researching Nibiru to a great extent, and there's really 4 of them that are the most known that are doing that. You know, Bob Fletcher, Gil Broussard, Marshall Masters, and Doug Elwell, who wrote the book The Sign of the Coming of the Son of Man, believing that is Nibiru. Now, what I'm learning from my Jewish friends is that in their mystical texts, it talks about new planets and stars will appear at the time of the coming of the Messiah.
Right.
And that Nibiru, of course they don't call it that, it's something else. I don't remember what they call it in the Jewish text, but they call these new stars and planets will appear in the sky during the time of the Messiah. That in one of their texts it talks about it being visible for 7 months, and that it will be surrounded by 7 planetary satellites. I don't know, moons or chunks of debris or something, but it's going to be dragging this stuff with it. And I'm going, well, okay.
The Book of the Colburn.
Sorry?
The Book of the Colburn really gets into.
Oh, yeah, the Colburn Bible. That's something that Marshall sells on his. I have one of those. I found it very interesting, actually. You know, there's like a whole couple chapters on the destroyer.
Yes, and I think you can find that in Isaiah, too. Isaiah makes, I can't remember what the verse is, but it talks about some object that comes through the sky, and it's a red object. And, of course, if you go into the book of Revelation, chapter 12, you've got the great red dragon. And everybody just says, well, that's Satan. Well, that may be the spiritual side of things. But it appears to me that the great red dragon is probably the destroyer from an astronomical point of view, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is why when people read the scriptures and they don't look at it from more of a contextual reference, from a scientific basis of what is really being said there, it makes no sense to most people. And, you know, they just blow it off without really considering the historical nature of the document they're reading. But yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in China, they got the dragon as, you know, it's the dragon, you know, and this thing had a tail on it, and there's a head on it and a tail on it. And, it, you know, before, according to Velikovsky, the tail was in one part of the world and the head was in the other part, and whoever was on the tail side got whacked by hailstones.
Which they would.
And, yeah, because it's ejecting all of this material. And it's also hot. So, but there's these theories that, you know, the Anunnaki came down from Nibiru and that there's all of this going on. And, you know, in the Hebrew calendar started, as of this year, 5,776 years ago to year zero and during creation. Now, they consider that the creation of the earth and everything, or at least Adam.
Right.
That, to me, unless we're all living in a digital simulation, that part of it is hard for me to grasp because there seemingly was stuff going on before then. And what I'm thinking is that was the year that the earth was recreated, and a bunch of weird things were going on that are very lightly touched upon in the first chapter of the book of Genesis.
Well,
things
the way
that
it's worded,
people tend to gloss over.
Yes, the way it's worded, it would, when you don't tell somebody to go forth and repopulate, unless there was something there before. And, you know, Jeremiah talks about that sort of thing, where there was no man, but there was a cataclysm.
There was a cataclysm. And yet we have races of people that have a lineage that goes back 20 to 40,000 years, like the Aborigines in Australia are a great example. And they don't look like anybody else that we happen to know about. How did they get here? Why are they here for so much longer than everybody else? And so here's where I get really in trouble with my Christian friends. It's like, well, what if Sitchin's theories and all the work he did reading all of the Sumerian cuneiform script was also right, and Adam and Eve was also right? What if there was something going on at the same time or even prior to Adam? The earth got wiped out. A lot of them survived, but the Bible just doesn't tell us that. because they were on the other side of the world at the time, and Adam and Eve were by the Euphrates River and all of that. It was a totally different thing. This would explain a lot of things that went on, like, well, where did all of the Philistines come from? You know, when we're talking about the Nephilim, we know that the Bible says they fell from heaven. Well, it's not like, we have this bizarre notion of someone falling from space. Well, no, I mean, they came down from heaven and landed on Mount Hermon, I guess it was, and had sex with the women, okay, and ended up having giants, or DNAs were incompatible. And it's like, why can't we just accept this as a historical document? Okay, this really happened. And now lately we're hearing rumors about Nephilim that are still alive, hiding in the caves of Afghanistan.
I interviewed Klaus Dona, and he's dug up some of these giants. I think the biggest one he dug up was like 25 feet tall. And and he also knows that Russian scientist who went in, I don't know if it was Tibet or where it was, where these giants are held in suspended animation by some sort of force field that you can't get very close to it because it would kill you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing. I think there's a lot of stuff that we just blow off and don't want to be ridiculed or don't want to be criticized about, when we should be looking into this stuff and finding out more about it. And
let me make this comment, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to make this comment, and I'll give it right back to you. My wife and I have studied a lot of Native American legends from the ancient Indian tribes, and there's a lot of tales that I have read where, and it's interesting that it talks about this judgment that comes, or the deluge, that God basically wiped everything, mankind, from the face of the earth, and in the Bible, the biblical term is face of the earth, you know. And it's so interesting because a lot of the Native American lore and history that are written now is that different groups went underground to escape a great cataclysm and a great flood, and then some of those came out from underground later on, and there were giant, you know, they talk about giants and giant creatures and all this kind of thing, and you know, all this kind of, like you said, Richard, it kind of blends in a little. It blends in really well with the Bible, except it's written in from a total different view and a different culture.
Well, I've always wondered, and I'll bounce this off both of you guys. If a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day, okay? So you had 6 days of creation. And if you multiply all of that out as 1,000 years in a day, and 1,000 years is as a day, it comes to over 1 million years that the earth would actually be around. It does. If you multiply it out, you have to do it both ways.
It's very conceivable to me that we've just misunderstood a lot of this stuff, and that this kind of thing makes a lot more sense to someone who's trying to evaluate and analyze what this means.
Yes. Yeah, Larry, you can jump in anytime.
Well, I was
going to mention
questions. I was just going to mention, Richard, I'm holding in my hand one of my favorite watchers, and it's Watchers 8, Cloak of Secrecy. And the reason I like the cover is because Roger Lear, who I came to know, previously on Art Bell a few times, but you guys used him a lot in the Watcher series, and I was so intrigued with the implants and the situation about the implants, and you guys really, throughout the Watchers, there was a trail you followed, even recovering implants from people, literally recovering them, and you know, I watched Spielberg's, who I think has had some insight into some of this stuff. Matter of fact, he interviewed Tom Horn's sister, who was an abductee, and some of the data that was in the movie Taken which I'm a sci-fi buff, and I can't escape it. And I loved that movie Taken, and it had so many details and clues in it. But one of the things that has always intrigued me, and speak about this if you will, I was so intrigued that in Taken, and that's been a while since that movie came out, but the implants were recovered and then began to change and be more alive or move and all this kind of stuff. And what you guys found with Roger Lear is the fact that, he told you later some of the implants that he had taken out of people had begun to morph and change. And you guys even found some of them to be elusive. Trying to obtain them, you had to really work at it, What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, the television series Taken, it was an incredibly well-done production. I have no idea how many millions they must have spent on that, and also the insight that was in there, are things that we have discovered, too, in our work with Roger and with other folks. This is I bought the whole series just so I could have it and look at it occasionally, put up an episode and see it again. And, of course, they use creative license, and there's some fictional stuff in there, too. But implants are very strange. And one thing that we always thought would be interesting would be, when Roger did a documentary, he did an interview for some show. It was in the 90s, late 90s. It was before I knew Roger. And he takes an implant out, and they had the surgical procedure going, and they pull it out, and it looks like a little rock or a little pyramidal kind of shaped stone that came out of this guy's arm. And the stuff we pull out looked totally different. And talking to Wilburn, who was chief scientist for A&S Research at the time that worked with Roger a lot, we've noticed an evolution in these things over time. Over a period of the last 20, 30 years, the implants have gotten more sophisticated. Not as large as they used to be. They seem to be able to do things that maybe they weren't from the earlier versions, or we don't know. What we have seen, and look, people can say, how does he know anything about implants? You'd have to be, what we've done the best we can. We've taken them out. We've taken them into lab. We've paid for lab time on an electron microscope with an EDX feature. And what EDX does, it allows you to, when you have an object blown up under the microscope, you can put the cursor over a spot of that object and say, what is that? And on the graph to the right, it shows you complete elemental breakdown. Oh, okay, it's 38% titanium, it's 99% carbon, it's like, and basically it shows you all of the elemental breakdown of what's in that thing. And in our experience doing that kind of thing, we found that these implants all have very similar characteristics. Their composition is similar in that they're basically nickel and iron, almost like a meteoric particle in percentage. They appear to not be from this earth as far as their structure. They often have nerve endings still attached to them when we pulled them and looked at them under the microscope. And I was talking with L.A. about this a couple days ago. Watchers 8, we show Steve cutting the little capsule open that this thing is in, and they're all in this little I don't know what to call this stuff. It's kind of like almost like a plasticky, clear coating that goes over these things. When you slit it with a knife, with a scalpel, a little fluid comes out, and then the implant just kind of slips out onto your test tube or onto your slide. And then this thing is basically an empty shell that it was in. Now, what that empty shell seems to be coming from, the implant itself seems to grow it. Now, if you have a foreign object in your body, like a sliver or something like that, the body tends to try to push it out. You know, it'll get kind of a liquid around it, and pus will sometimes form, and pretty soon you've got it erupting on the surface, and you squeeze your skin and some goop comes out, and all of a sudden you got it in your hand. It's pushed it out. Not the case with an alien implant. There is no entrance portal visible on the skin where it went in. There is no inflammation or bacterial infection that takes place while it's in the body. And when it's removed, when you do any testing in a lab of this coating, it says the same thing. There's no biological infection and no inflammation present.
Are they biological in nature?
Yeah.
Any
The
of them?
coating is, but the implant isn't.
Okay.
The implant is metallic or almost somewhat ceramic at times, it seems to me, but they're different. They're not all the same. They're different. Some of them look like a little bent piece of wire. The one that we had in Watchers 8 that you mentioned, Larry, was about 6 millimeters in length, about the diameter of a pencil lead, and was putting out 7 milligauss of magnetism.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The frequency, y'all found.
Yeah, and that's another thing. These implants, typically when they're connected to the nervous system in the body. Oh, that's what I was getting at. I'm sorry, I've kind of gone astray here a little bit. What I don't know is when this coating evolves around the implant, somehow it doesn't affect the way that the nerves are attached to the inner body of the implant itself. It goes through that coating somehow without hurting the nerves. I mean, isn't that weird?
Very.
So when you pull the coating off and you take the implant out and you put it under the SEM, you can still see and you can still put the EDX cursor on there, and it says 99% carbon, which is human tissue. So we know we've got nerve endings because we've looked at it. And this is not conjecture, guys. We're not just stating our opinion on these things. This is just what we found. Now, we're not saying we know how they work, but we're just telling you what we've discovered. And this is the way it is. And since Roger has gone, the number of implants being removed has declined, and we've got to find new people involved. And I've been approached about that recently, that we probably need to start up again and somehow continuing the research. But before Roger passed away, he was at my house, and I said, you've taught me so much, Roger. I think I could actually do this myself now. Not ever expecting to, know as much as he knows, and I'm not a doctor or anything like that. But there is a process. It's very logical, and I know the test equipment involved, and I've been through all the stages, and I've talked for literally days with Roger. So, I mean, this is nothing that I'm not incredibly familiar with.
What was his opinion on what they actually are and what they're actually for?
Well, way back in our first Watchers, the one where we hardly had any money to work with, that I was telling you about earlier, that was Watchers 1 that we produced in the fall of 2010. He was giving us, he gave us a lot of information, and so much that we couldn't put it all on the film. And I've saved all of our interviews with Roger. I've never thrown any of them out.
Wow.
Someday I should probably do outtakes with Roger Lear on just stuff that most people would, go fall asleep on to listen to all the details, and other people might be really interested. But he said that he talked to a woman who had an implant and who actually had an alien visitation, and Roger said, some people think these things are homing devices, and she just laughed. And he said, what? And she said, they don't need homing devices to find any of us. She said, they can find us from our DNA through an electronic signature that all of our bodies are emitting.
Mm.
Their technology is so further advanced from ours. So then that meant that, well, then what are they using these for? What do they even need an implant? And there are many theories about it. I think it's a bidirectional signal from them to us and from us to them in some of the more recent implants. But then there's people that I know, and this can be proven via X-ray, that have implants behind each ear and in the center of their brain.
Huh. Really?
And I've talked with one of them, and I said, what do you think that's in there for? And how did, why would they do that? He said, I think is live out my experience. So he said, they're probably watching us discuss this even now.
So,
which creeped me out a bit at that point, I have to say.
We're containers. This is what a lot of them say, anyway, that we're just containers, and they're very interested in the soul and the spirit, which would intend to confirm that they're fallen ones.
Yeah.
Did he have any?
Well, I think some of them want to know what's going on by looking through our eyes and listening through our ears. And the only way they can do that is have a connection into certain parts of the brain and then have those implants broadcast that to them through some sort of super high frequency communication, which has been measured routinely by Roger. People have had implants, all are emitting radio waves. All of them
Okay,
are.
so they are transmitters then.
They are, but I think they're also receiving information. I think it's more than just simple tracking devices. That's our puny brains thinking, that kind of thing. These are like, I really think that, and Roger did too, that these implants are like super sophisticated microcomputers using nanotechnology to develop, a very tiny, small device that is probably being powered by zero-point energy or scalar waves or something. It may not even need to be powered from our nervous system. It may have its own source of power, and our nervous system is just the wire that plugs it in, as Roger always says.
Now, the people that get these, Larry, you can jump in anytime with a question or whatever, but the people that get these, are they all visited by aliens, so to speak?
Well, that's a good question, and forgive me if I'm monopolizing this whole conversation.
No, I want you to.
Oh, this is fine. Yeah.
And I had no idea what we were going to talk about tonight at all. In fact, I went into this going, what am I preparing for? I had no idea.
We just kind of wander and let the spirit move it.
Well, this is fun. It's people that have had implants typically have been abducted or they've had a visitation. And, this gets into X-Files and stuff like that. But that's typically how they've gotten their implants.
You mentioned the X-Files.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about the X-Files? I always thought they're just trying to reveal an awful lot of stuff, but they're doing it through fictional situations. What's your take on that? Or
well,
LA's
I think the X-Files is a dichotomy of creepy, weird, semi-horror, dramatic episodes that have some semblance in science, and then there's others that are so close to the truth it's kind of stunning. And unless people who are watching it actually study the phenomena, you wouldn't know the difference. But Roger was actually asked to consult on one of the X-Files. I think it was the one where Scully discovered she had an implant in one of the earlier episodes. And they brought him in, and he explained all that to them. And they did it fairly well, except to the fact when they looked at it, it looked like a printed circuit board, which none of the implants ever look like that. So I'm going, well, that's fake. But maybe they had to not make it too real just for network television's sake.
Yeah.
But the idea that they were implanting someone, now X-Files made it seem as if we're doing it, like the government's doing it, in some kind of clandestine black ops program. I mean, they have all of that, or they're trying to give people alien DNA. In the most recent X-Files series that just came out just a couple months ago, there were 6 episodes of the new X-Files. Some episodes were really goofy and stupid, and others were just brilliant. It was rather uneven, I thought. But the first one that came out with...
Maybe that's the way he gets away with it.
I think so. I think it's the same kind of deal like... remember the show Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura?
Yeah.
That was on True TV for 2 or 3 years. Really interesting show. And I went over and met with the producers of the show, and they loved Watchers. And, in fact, one of their seasons looks just like Watchers 4, something I had designed. After I gave them Watchers 4, I think they copied it. But I thought they did a really excellent job on the earlier episodes of Conspiracy Theories. But then word has it that Jesse Ventura was getting threats for what he was doing. And what I think happened in the later episodes, they had to dumb it down if they were going to produce any more.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they did.
Their way. Yep, they have their way.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who was kind of a genius. He's dead now, but he claimed, and I have no reason to doubt him, that he had invented a battery and an electric car that was far superior to anything. And the government came down visited him at his house and said, you are not going to produce this. Do you get the drift? Which he did, of course. In other words, if you want to live.
Yeah, at a certain point, I think that thinking people know that this type of thing is going on, these kind of threats are real, and that eventually that has to be eliminated. And the only way for civilization to climb up above where we are is by using our brains and enacting some of this new technology that we know exists. And I was talking with Dr. Brooks Agnew, who's a really good friend of mine. I like Brooks a great deal, and he's got an electric car company in North Carolina called Vision Motor Cars. And one day we were just riding around. He had to come out to do a show for, Discovery Network or something. And so he called me up and wanted to go to lunch while he was out here. So we went to lunch, and he said, guess how many companies in America are producing rechargeable batteries? I said, I have no idea, Brooks. 5, 6? And he goes, 0.
Huh.
So they're all made in China. All of them.
Wow.
All the lithium-ion batteries, lithium batteries in general, all of them are being made in China. And so, therefore, the technology hasn't really gotten much further because they're just making what we tell them to make, or they're making what they know to make, and they do it cheap enough where we can afford to put them in our laptop computers and our, quadcopters and anything else, cameras. But he said, we're working on our own battery source now, and he said it doesn't heat up and explode like some of the others do.
Yeah, nightcats can do that.
And
they can be very dangerous. I was a pilot. I had a a long career flying professionally, and yeah, NICADs can even blow an airplane up. They can short out, and you can have a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah, batteries can, when they're charging, can overheat and catch on fire, and that's been a problem. I mean, a 777 caught on fire because of a lithium battery that got too hot.
Yes.
But he has a way of insulating the layers so it doesn't do that. But yet, where's all the other American companies building batteries? And I think it's because our corrupt government prevents anything that might lead to something that we're doing on our own soil.
Yeah.
And it's all part of this whole globalism that everyone's fighting against, and it's starting to cause people to really get upset. I think I don't know what's going to happen after this election. If the GOP is in shambles and the Democrats are doing the crazy stuff, so it's like, I wondered if there's going to be a revolution or something in the U.S. I have no idea.
Well,
let me ask you something, Richard. Oh,
yeah, go ahead, Larry.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to ask Richard. I know that Richard has had a recent, well, not recent now, but a few months back, had a special trip to Israel. And Richard, I know you're going to do a documentary on some of that. So what you don't want to talk about, don't. I mean, don't even bring it up. But we're all interested in what's going on in the Middle East, and especially Israel itself. And of course, your connection with Dan Gordon, who I've interviewed, and he's a great guy. He's got a new book coming out warning about the borders in the U.S. just any week now. But I was going to ask you, Richard, you're familiar with what goes on, the war, the tunnels, all of that, and I know you haven't done a lot of your docu work yet on that, and maybe LA's going to work with you on releasing some. But can you share with us part of it about your trip? And if you want to bring in your drone at the same time, I mean, there's not everybody that can walk around and have a drone fly over them in Israel, Share with us a little of that story and what's going on over there, and what you think. And by the way, if there's anything you want to talk about, any kind of coming temple or work or, any of that, what you don't want to talk about, don't. But we just got a big ear. We like to hear. To be honest.
I'm always hoping to get back to Israel at any possible excuse. Right now I'm trying to finish Watchers 10 and hoping to get back to Israel later in the year. And I've talked to Dan about it. There's a lot going on over there, obviously, guys. I mean, with ISIS and Hezbollah and Hamas and all of that. I learned quite a bit about what's really happening with the tunnel situation when I was there before. I stood on the border of the Gaza Strip with Danny Grossman, who's a former A-4 fighter pilot in Israel, and everybody in Israel knows him. And what's funny is Israel's and everybody knows each other there, or at least people that make a dent, everyone knows who they are. So everyone knows who Danny Grossman is. He might be hanging out with Netanyahu one day, or he might be up doing something else. I mean, he's, so to actually have him send me emails occasionally is kind of a treat. And when we were doing our shoot originally for the Torah Code film, Danny would come in to help us get access to some of these places, and he would always bring us a fresh box of brownies that he had made. But he helped me get out of the country with my drone because it has lithium batteries in it. They were afraid to put it on the plane. I said, well, guys, I flew with it. Nothing happened. But, I mean, it's like, everybody, there is no standard as far as security on certain devices, either here in the U.S. or in Israel. Everything's looked at from an individual basis. Mm-hmm. Here in the U.S., there's something like 400,000 drones that have been sold. And now, of course, the FAA has come in and required like a $5 licensing fee to get your drone registered. So I have a little sticker on my drone with an FAA number on it. I said FCC, I meant FAA, Federal Aviation, So it's considered an unmanned aerial vehicle, and some of these drones can fly pretty high. And the one I have is pretty cool too. It's actually for those who are interested in knowing what I'm using to shoot with, I've got it's by a company called Unique Typhoon 4K 500Q. It's got a really super long model number, but this thing has a 3-position gimbal with a 4K camera on it that is incredibly controllable quadcopter.
Yes.
And as soon as you think you got the hottest, coolest thing, they're making a different one that's even neater. But the Typhoon has got this adapter you can get, which I don't have yet, but I've got it, unless I decide just to buy a totally new one. But it has a wand, and you can point it up to the sky and basically click a button with the intention of go over there where I'm pointing, and the thing just goes zoop, and just flies right over to where you're pointing the stick. I mean, these things have gotten super sophisticated. It has a follow me feature or a watch me feature. It'll follow you wherever you are. So we took that thing through Qumran. I flew over the caves of Qumran with the Typhoon. I flew over roadways and through really, really deserted rubble highways where we were driving a Land Rover Defender that will basically run over anything, and got some incredible shots with it and brought that home. And well, I'm using it on Watchers 10 for some of the stuff we're doing. But what I think is so interesting about these drones is that they are so stable that it looks like you have it on a tripod, but it could be 300 feet in the air. It's just completely stable. I mean, it just rock solid. It's like, what? How is that possible?
Yeah, Hollywood.
So that's
style
the kind of
aviation.
technology we have.
Yeah,
now the ones that you can get for movies, which my friend Bob Williams was on a shoot in China, $160 million film. And the kind of drones they have now for Hollywood use are huge. They might have, 6 rotors or maybe more than that, and they can lift a payload where you could have like a Canon 5D with a lens on it and everything that weighs several pounds, and this thing is lifting it up into the air, and the landing gear retracts, and you can fly, with complete smoothness and like a Steadicam, with this thing.
It's kind of replaced the helicopters.
Well, it's actually smoother than most of the helicopter footages, unless you go with a Westcam rig, which is really expensive, which most people can't afford to do, because it just, first of all, you got to rent the helicopter, you got to install the Westcam on it if it doesn't already have one installed, and then you got to sit inside with a controller and run the camera. I mean, it's a big friggin' deal. But now you can just go out with this, and you got a digital file, and you go home and cut it into the show. It's like it's instantly ready, and you don't need any help. It's unbelievable what we're able to do now. I would have never, when I first started in television, would have believed the kind of stuff that we have to work with now. And one company that's doing amazing stuff is Sony. And on this last trip to Israel, Sony set as a camera to use because they knew what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just
when you were over there,
unbelievable.
What about Vendel Jones? Is he still over there making the digs, or is he gone? You're familiar with Vendel, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, sure. Vendel Jones passed away in 2010.
Oh, he did.
He passed away. His big exploration was there's something called the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll now resides in Amman, Jordan, at a museum. But the Copper Scroll was originally found in one of the caves in Qumran in 1952. It was highly corroded. They didn't know what it was, and they were afraid to bend it because it would break. Mm-hmm. So they sent it to London to have it forensically opened so they could read it. And so they used a razor saw and sliced it down each column of text. And if you know all this, I won't go into it. But basically, and it took decades to figure out what it said. Well, more recently, within the past 10 years or so, they've figured it out. The opening comments in the Copper Scroll apparently was written by the prophet Jeremiah, which was kind of exciting when I heard that.
Yes.
And that adds tremendous credibility to it. You know, it's like basically Israeli street cred from a very ancient document. It's probably 2,500-year-old document. And it was essentially a treasure map. It has like columns of text saying, okay, if you look in this area, you'll find, you know, this. And if you look in this area, you'll find that. Well, Vendell Jones took that seriously and thought he would try to find one of the things that seemed easy to find, and that was the priestly anointing oil.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that.
And what you know, shocks me to think so few people know, but he found it. There was a kaf and a Hebrew character in the scroll that was kind of like a finger that hung down below the baseline, and it had like what looked like two upside down U's. Now these are Hebrew characters for people who have not seen that before. But when you look at that from a graphic sense, and I was taken to this place, it looks like two caves with a pillar between them. It's a graphic representation, and in one of those caves is where they found the juglet of anointing oil from the high priest. Now, what was interesting, when they dug it up, it was kind of surrounded by kind of a whitish powder that was under the ground. It wasn't in a cave or anything. It was buried. And this whitish powder tended to act as silica gel.
Really?
And absorbed all the moisture. And when they opened it, the exact amount of oil was still in the juglet after 2,500 years. So we went to Jerusalem in Israel. Now, I'm not revealing anything that some people don't already know. There's some things I can talk about, some things I can't for all the obvious reasons. But the juglet was supposed to be in one of the main museums in Jerusalem. And so we go over there and we go, let's see this thing. I just want to see what it looks like. I had no idea. I'd never seen even a picture of it. And they looked, and we went through the whole museum, couldn't find it. And we went back to the front desk and asked the lady there, where's the juglet of anointing oil? And she looked, she got on the phone, everything. And she said, it's back in the warehouse in storage.
Temple preparations?
I think what it is, right now in Israel, that kind of thing almost is like another thing that the Palestinians can use to cause a problem with. I mean, it's any of these things that are like proof of the Torah is real and that this is actually Israel's land. They don't want coming out into the open.
Right.
So they're trying to keep the peace over there, but at a certain point it's like, enough already. But then a few years after that was I think that was discovered in 1988. Well, a few years fast forward to I think it was 1992, and another friend of mine whose name I'll keep out of off the radio here, had been working with Vendell for a number of years and was familiar with all of his work. This is the guy who I know now and communicate with on a semi-regular basis. And he wanted to see if they could find the spice cave. Now, this was the spices that they used during the time of Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the Copper Scroll, it talked about this other cave that was supposed to be in. Well, they started digging and realized they were in the wrong cave, that it was like west or north, and the directions were kind of weird, but it meant the upper cave. So they hiked around this other area, and sure enough, there was a cave, but it was completely full of rock. Someone had filled it with rock. And, I mean, this cave is like tall. It must be 20-foot ceiling, part of it, completely full of rock. So they excavated the whole cave. And they removed all of that rock, and it was something like 30,000 tons of rock. And they had just helpers. They had like a conveyor belt, and they scooped this stuff up in buckets and threw it on a belt, and it went into big bins, and it went down the mountainside. And when they dug at the point where they thought that the spices might be, they found them.
Wow.
Spices ended up in the possession of, as far as I remember, of Vendel Jones' daughter, if I remember correctly. And they're not on display anywhere in Jerusalem. I believe they're in Lebanon currently. I mean, isn't this weird? It's just so inexplicable to me that these two incredible finds are just kind of nobody knows about them.
Yeah.
Is Israeli antiquities maybe? This is obviously very volatile from a political point of view.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, and yet it's not a secret. I mean, if you do your homework, you can find this out. And I'm not revealing any secrets.
Right.
But I think that some things it's best to leave sleeping dogs lie, I think the management feels sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But if things get much worse, I don't know. It seems like Israel needs some help. I mean, it seems like they need to go in and find some stuff that's completely uncontestable at that point. And basically, I think that could happen.
Now, the rabbis, when they're running these codes, is from what I understand, they keep coming up with 2015, 2016, 2017. Is that correct, pretty much?
That's correct. That's been happening. There's a lot of them working on it right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's, excuse me, there's a couple rabbis that have rented an office in Jerusalem just to look up gematria for Messiah codes. Excuse me. And there is another man who passed away a couple years ago who put up his findings on the net. And we wanted to, I have to show you this, it's incredible. And he comes over with this big book. I said, what is that? And he goes, I printed it off of this man's website. And he shows it to me, and it's what I showed in this first little video that's on my website, endtodarkness.com, was some of the things, the findings from that book. And it's basically how all of these scriptures, through their gematria, which is different than a Torah code, it's gematria, which is each Hebrew letter has a number assigned to it, and when you add them up, you get a summum total. And it's like one thing after another ended up being 776. And I asked Laverson in that interview, which you guys can see, if anybody wants to see it, it's up for free on endtodarkness.com. But basically, 5776 is this year, it's 2016. And all of these gematria codes pointed to Messiah this year. Now, I just thought that was interesting. Now, I'm not saying that we know for certain or can possibly say that is really what's going to happen, because we're not supposed to do that. But nevertheless, it's interesting. Do you guys know who Tom Horn is?
Oh, yes.
Author. He wrote Exo Vaticana with Chris Putnam, and he just recently came out with a book, Zenith 2016. And it's a really big book, and I haven't had time to wade through it yet because I've been so busy editing. But I like Tom a lot, and when I was over to visit Skywatch last month, I was at Tom's home, and we sat down for an hour, and I don't think we even braked for coffee or anything like that. We talked nonstop back and forth about 2016 because he'd just done all this research that I was interested in, and Then I had all this research that I had done, and it's all kind of lining up. And he said, well, I guess what I'm just trying to do is ask the question, why? And I said, exactly. I mean, we can't make predictions, but why are we getting all of this information dumped on us for this year? I don't understand it. I've never seen anything like it before, and I think we have to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Just to make people aware.
I did some research. I put out a documentary called The Omega Code, but it wasn't based on that so much as I used the 120-year comment from Genesis. And the Lord said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be again. So I took that on a more literal basis and tried to figure out, well, okay, he's really telling us that there's going to be a 120-year period. Where do we date it from? So I decided I'll date it from 1897 and the first Jewish Congress. And I'll run a 120-year session. And what I found out was absolutely incredible. Larry knows about it, but there are 10-year cycles, 20-year cycles, 30-year cycles, 40-year cycles, 50-year cycles, and 70-year cycles, all embedded within that 120 years, all falling on key years of Israel's existence. It expires 2017.
Whoa.
I can send you that if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I mean, that's basically what Glazerson is coming up with. I'm writing a book called The Messiah Codes, if I can get it finished, because I just want to put, it may not be a very long book because I don't have time to write a long one, but just to put out all the stuff that we've got so people can see it. Sometimes you can't even do this all in a video because, it would just be, it's not like you can just flip through the pages in a book and compare in a video, So
yes.
There's benefits to having a video if you want fast information, but then if you want to just kind of get down and study something, then a book still seems to be a little more practical. But the years 5776 and 5777, which is 2016 and 2017, are really important years from what we're seeing.
Yes.
And Glazerson is just like beside himself. He just wants to get on any network, any way he can get his message out there. He wants me to do a Messiah Codes documentary. But I said, Glazerson, this is where we've had discussions about trying to bring the Jewish community, Judaic community, and the Christian communities together. So let's function together and try to get this done. Because I said, look, I'm happy to do another documentary, but it's darned expensive. I mean, it's going to be $75,000 to embark upon this, to do it, because the last time I did it, it was a sweat because we were underfunded, and yet if it hadn't been for David Greenhill, who put up the bulk of the funds, God bless him, we'd never even have the Torah Code film. But it's expensive to go to Israel. I mean, you guys probably know that if you've been there before. I mean, first of all, you got to get there, then you have to stay somewhere, and then you have to have production expenses, and you have to hire people. And all of a sudden, what sounds like a whole lot of money is really nothing. It just kind of evaporates. And then you get home after you spent all that money, and all you have is a couple hundred hours of video. And then you have to buy music and hire narrators and edit it and do sound sweetening and then mastering. Most people don't know this, but the Torah Code Blu-ray version, which I felt was important to do it in high def, was mastered at Deluxe. Now, Deluxe are the guys here in Hollywood that do all the major motion pictures, but they were the only ones that could handle this.
Wow.
So that was expensive. But I love the guys at Deluxe. They're consummate pros over there. I've worked with them before on other projects. That's who I want to work with on my projects. I don't want to just throw it to the wolves. I want it to be done right. So I do everything but the actual pressing and mastering. That I can't do. I have to send that to my friend Mary Pat over at ADS, Advanced Digital Systems. They do all of the duplicating and stuff, and including the standard def DVD version that people still like to buy. People are afraid of Blu-ray, I guess. I don't know why that is. I mean, basically, you can go over to Best Buy and get a Blu-ray player now for like $59, and it will play your Blu-ray disc, and it looks so much better. But people are just, creatures of habit. If they have a DVD player, that's all they think they need. But really, when you're getting into Torah codes, they get so complicated that I wanted people to see them at high def.
Yeah, Richard, didn't you have to actually go to a DVD, though, to get it to Israel, where they could have it?
Yeah, I did. Glazerson said, well, no one will buy the Blu-ray copy. I said, well, there's a DVD in the Blu-ray box, so that no matter what you got. He said, yeah, but they don't want to spend the extra money if they just want the regular DVD. I said, okay, I will make just a DVD just for Israel. How about that? And he goes, great. So I spent some of our profits to make a master for just standard def and put it out there. And now Breaking Israel News just put another order in the other day.
Wow,
they're selling
that's
him
good.
in Jerusalem. Yeah, so it's like, and look, no one's getting rich off of this, guys. I don't want anybody to think, and I get these really snide remarks that, Richard's making,
I do all the time.
millions of dollars on the product. Well, no, we haven't even made back our original production costs yet. I mean, it takes a long time to do that. Imagine if your budget's $75,000 and you're selling a DVD for, $14.95. How many you're going to have to do, and then there's, percentages that have to be divided up to everybody that helped. And I don't make a point in saying this because it might seem braggadocious, but we send 10% of all of our profits back to the Torah Code experts just for research.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I don't think people realize what it costs. And
no, I think everybody's used to YouTube.
I think so. Yeah, it's amazing because then you get criticized if you charge anything, and I've run into it. Larry's run into it, but I finally came up with an answer for these guys. If you will go to your boss and you will tell him you're going to work for nothing for 6 months or a year with no salary, no perks, no nothing, and if you won't do that, then you're kind of a hypocrite when it comes to saying that somebody that's invested $500,000 or $100,000 in a documentary doesn't have a right to charge for it.
Well, yeah.
Because what they're really asking you to do is work for nothing.
Yeah, and basically pay all the expenses. And and it's a lot of work too. Most people don't realize it's travel, it's coming up with the concept, it's writing copy, it's shooting, editing, lighting, sound, and things. And on that kind of a budget, I can't afford to even hire a gaffer. Now, in the past, I would, I'd call up my friend and say, hey, I need some lighting in here on Thursday at such and such a location, and would drive a truck, and like 2 or 3 guys would hop out and light it for me. Well, we can't afford to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those days are gone. I mean, we used to have a lot more money to work with, and now we have to put out a product that looks better than what we were doing back then when we had money, and now we have very little money, but we're still doing it. So, but I feel like it's important to do it, so I'm still doing it.
Well, I think that's true, and there's something with this mentality, and I suppose probably YouTube's at fault for it in a way. that intellectual property, really, you're not supposed to profit from it. Well, you could at least get your expenses back.
Yeah, and then after you do that, you're taxed through the nose on everything. At least we are here in California.
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Here's something that maybe you guys don't know. I'm assuming you guys have each seen at least one Watchers.
Oh, yes.
I've seen all of them.
Usually we open with L.A. on the beach somewhere, and I'm shooting them looking down where you can see, like, the waves of Malibu crashing or something. So for Watchers 9, we were out there doing that. And it's just me and a camera filming L.A. talking. That's it. The two of us. No crew, no help, no nothing. L.A. puts on his own mic. I set up my own equipment. It's professional gear, but I mean, it's very, very minimal. I don't even set up a tripod because I don't want to have any excuse for anyone to say you're putting something on the ground, anything like that. So I'm hand-holding everything so that we're in and out in a flash. Mm-hmm. And this officer comes up and asks us for our shooting permit.
Huh.
And I said, we're here on the beach, and there's like me shooting a guy handheld. It's the two of us. Now, in the past, there used to be a rule that you had to have a crew of something like 5 people. That used to be the rule to get a shooting permit requirement. And now they're just saying any shoot, anywhere in Los Angeles, in a person's house, out on the beach. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's just like it's basically completely stifled independent film production here in California, and it's weirdly communistic in my own view. It's like, where's our freedom just to go out and shoot something? It's like, this is crazy. But see, what happens is, what most people don't know is, once you apply for a shooting permit, which we've done before, we've shot in Los Angeles, we've shut down streets. This is back when we had money to do something. And once you do that, then they want your shooting insurance. Now, insurance for a shoot, oh my gosh, it can cost $5,000 to $6,000 for insurance.
Yes.
And the permit could be another $1,500. So to get a simple shoot in the city of Los Angeles now could cost you $6,000-$7,000 for one shoot. And you haven't done anything yet. You haven't rented any equipment, and you haven't hired any people. It's just to get past the logistical aspects of it. Nobody knows this stuff. So a lot of shooting is done really quick before anybody can come tell you to leave. People are using drones where they don't know where they're coming from. But it's getting totally ridiculous, in my opinion, on how this is being handled. And, it's actually, I found it easier to shoot in Israel, even with all that's going on there, than it is here in L.A., which is really a bit, that's kind of terrifying to me, actually. And I asked the guys at the hotel, I said, hey, do you guys mind if would it be okay to get some drone footage over Jerusalem? And I said, and if it's not, I totally understand. So they sent a guy out for me to talk to the police department and very kindly said, we're a little nervous to have you do that just because of the current situation. And I totally understood that because, one day we went to visit Solomon's Quarry, and you have to get off at the Damascus Gate there on Jerusalem to see it. And the next day at that very gate where we got off, the landing there where the train drops you off, someone got stabbed.
Yeah.
So if we send up a drone in that neighborhood, then it's likely that some of the Palestinians will think that they're being spied on, and they're going to get mad and stab even more people. See what I'm saying? So it's not that Israel cares whether I shoot footage. It's just they don't want to stir up any more trouble than they've already got.
Well, they are in a lot of trouble, and I'm sure they all know it. Are they, and Larry knows this, but I think it was BB who was asked, well, who are your enemies? And he said, everybody.
Yeah, including Obama.
Oh, absolutely. He's probably their worst enemy and doesn't even know it. I mean, this guy
it's a real embarrassment to the United States right now, in my opinion, for doing what he's doing over there. And he's basically destabilized the whole Middle East and giving Iran carte blanche to make a bomb, even though he says he's not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to betray totally Israel. I think that's what his job is. I think his job is here to destroy the United States. I don't know if you're familiar, but there was a prophecy made back in, when was that, Larry? 1912 or 1812? It's called the Kenyan prophecy.
Yes.
And in that prophecy, it said, this was a Christian elder, that a son of Kenya at the time of the end would become president of the United States, and that his job was basically to destroy the United States.
He's done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. So when people ask him, have you done a good job as president, he says yes. Well, he's answering from his perspective. He's doing an excellent job. But his job is to destroy us. And I think his job is to destroy Israel. He hates Christians. I don't care what anybody says. It's obvious what he's doing to our military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's obvious he's pro-Islam and he's antichrist to the core.
By their fruits you shall know them. I mean, I would tend to agree with that assessment because I haven't seen him say anything in support of the Christians being slaughtered over in the Middle East, ever.
Exactly.
I mean, he doesn't ever say, something bad will happen, and he lectures the American people about it. It's like, well, what did we do?
Exactly. No, I think he is here to destroy, and I guess I have to look at this as the Lord possibly is, or more than possibly, is targeted the United States for apostasy and for corruption and for criminal activities. And a friend of mine had a vision one time. It was a very, very interesting vision. He was taken above the United States, and he was looking down, and he said he saw this most beautiful golden egg right in the middle of the country. And it was just a gorgeous, glowing golden egg. Then he said he saw cracks develop, and this ugly, evil-looking stuff came out of the egg and went over the whole country. And a voice said, this is what she looks like on the outside, but this is what she is on the inside.
No. Well, it's come to a point where it seems like I don't know. It's depressing and a bit discouraging to me to see what's happening to our country, especially those of us who remember what it used to be like. Which is a problem for the younger generation who's never had any knowledge of what America once was and how people used to react. There's an old movie that I rented from Netflix a while back. It's just called Air Force. What's this? I've never seen, and I'm a fan of all kinds of movies, new ones, old ones. And even if there's an old one that I've never seen, I'll rent it and go, what is this? I just want to know what it is. Maybe it's junk and I'll be bored and I'll send it back. Well, Air Force was about these guys who were flying bombers over to Hawaii. That was their job. They had to fly them over there, and it happened to be the day before September 7th. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a historical film, and by the time they get there, the whole all of Hawaii is engaged in this battle, and they had to land these planes. But I guess what was so intriguing about that movie to me was just the difference in attitudes versus now. Like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to do this. They figured stuff out. They landed their plane in a remote area, broke the landing gear. They got out a tree. They sawed it off. They propped this giant bomber up. They fixed the wheel. I mean, these guys were just like, okay, well, we just got to do that. I mean, they were like, can do anything. There was no complaining, no griping. It was just, we got to get back on the road because we got to get this thing somewhere else. They were there to defend our country.
Yeah.
And there was no agenda where, well, we've got to have this many of this nationality in the Army, or this many gays, or this many women, it wasn't anything like that. It was basically just getting the job done.
Yes.
The best way to do that with the people that knew what they were doing more than anybody else. Now, these were guys that understood mechanics and, could work on an airplane, and, basically there wasn't time to fool around with what's politically correct. It was just a matter of rescuing the country. And, there's all these theories that, well, Roosevelt knew it was going to happen and all that, but still, all I'm saying is there was an attitude that has since disappeared from this country among most people, and what they expect out of the country, and what they think is correct now. It's really kind of a warped, twisted thing that's going on, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I think Larry could attest to that, being a police officer. He's mentioned. Larry, why don't you go into that a little bit, the attitude change?
Oh, yeah.
The police department.
Yeah, I was in police work for many years, 35 or more years, and and to go along with what Richard just said, when I went into I was in the Air Force also. I was in the SAC, the Strategic Air Command, around the B-52 bombers and all of that, and there was an attitude then. You had a function, and of course, being in SAC, if you watch any of the old SAC movies, every base continually had drills. I mean, these drills were serious, and when the planes left the ground, you didn't know if it was real or not. But you didn't even consider it might not be real. You considered it was, and base commanders rose and fell because of those drills, simply those drills. And there was a readiness like I've never seen, and everybody gets excited. I was in the medical corps, and we went when the whole base drilled. We drilled too, and of course I've been flown out, and we worked plane crashes and all kind of things. But even in police work, back in the early days of police work, the early 70s, it was to protect and serve, and those words were not on a police car that we drove. Simply just to be a sign. We really did go out there with the attitude to get the job done, to go out in the field and come home safe and put the bad guys away. And we didn't even consider what color the bad guy might be. He usually wore a black hat and we're proud of it. We knew who he was. But interestingly, it began to morph and change. Law enforcement did a number of years ago into not protect and serve anymore, even though that was what was on the police cars. There was a mentality change and a more federalized attitude and a militaristic attitude in police work, and it began to be what you would call an us and them syndrome, us being the police on duty at that time and the them being the American people, the public. That became an enemy, it seemed. And Stewart, over the years, I've talked to you on those shows, and that just goes along with exactly what Richard has described.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Larry. I think some people are thinking the police has become judge, jury, and executioner, especially in some of the black communities, which is, I think, helped spawn a lot of this rebellion and violence. These things don't happen without cause. And I'm not saying that all policemen are evil either, because my goodness, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have any. There would be no, semblance of reason or order. But when I did the Words Project and hung out with my black friends when we were doing that, I got a different side of really what they're going through. And also, when I was working for Fox years ago in Atlanta, I had black friends there. And they'd come in late some morning. I said, hey, where have you been? And they'd say, oh, I got pulled over by a cop. I said, for what? Because I'm black, basically. This was in Atlanta. They would pull black people over just to question them. I mean, this happened to one of our best producers there at Fox and also our TD, which is one of the best in Atlanta. Really good friends of mine who I respected as being professionals would get pulled over for no reason. So later on when we were working on the Words Project, and we were traveling on Bone Thugs and Harmony's tour bus, which shocked a lot of the music people here in Los Angeles. How did you guys get so close to the Bone Thugs? Because they're really kind of a close family. Well, Lazy Bone told both Lee and I, said, we want you guys along because you're our protectors, they said. Because they knew we'd pray if there was a problem. Isn't that cool?
That is good.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, Richard,
I really love
Lazy. For those that haven't seen your Words Project, it is incredible. And some of the, you talked on one of the radio shows that I had you on, and it was just absolutely the relationship that developed was really, you almost have to say, moving in a heavenly direction to some degree.
Well, when we started on that project, I don't know, it was 2007 or something, and again, it started out with my friend Lee Cantillon. He'd written this book called The Words, and basically he'd worked like 7 years on it. It's basically just the words of Christ in a book with all the intervening text lifted out. And so it's kind of neat. You just pick up this book and open it, and you go, well, this is a little thing, but it's everything is chronologically correct, and it's just the words of Christ talking. And if someone isn't familiar with those words, this is a great book. And you don't have to read the whole Bible. You just pick up this and read it. Well, I met this guy named Big Slice, and he came over to my studio, wanted to do a car show. And Big Slice is this huge 6'4" guy. He comes in my studio, big smile. I immediately fell in love with him. It was just like the coolest guy. Find out that him and Snoop had grown up together. He had built all of Snoop's lowrider cars. And I just liked him. I thought he was great. He took me to Watts. He showed me where he grew up. He told me where his grandmother lived. I met all these kids with white T-shirts on that, met us out in the parking lot, all gave us like CDs and rap music they were doing. I'm going, this is another world. It was like really outrageous. And so Lee goes, I wonder if Slice would read the words for us. I said, well, he probably would. So I asked my friend Warren, who was my contact for Big Slice in those days, and Warren said, well, Lazy Bone would probably do a song for you. I said, no kidding. Now this is the Bone Thugs and Harmony. Most Christians probably don't even know who that is. And they basically were, they got their start on Death Row Records and worked with Snoop and worked with some other folks, and most people would like stay away from them like the plague. I found these guys to be just as sweet and soft-hearted and as talented as they come. And they all wanted to rap the words of Christ. Couldn't keep them from doing it. No, you can't because you're doing this other stuff. No. Hey, come on in, do it. And so what happened was we had a wave of people from the professional music industry that all wanted to be in the project, and we also had Christian bands, and I wouldn't let any of them in. I said, no, there's no mamsy-pamsy, bubblegum music in this project. This is going to be guys from South Central. It's going to be Bone Thugs and Harmony. It's going to be the Last Poets and people like that. And that's what we did. And the project was highly controversial. A lot of Christians were offended by it and said terrible things about it, but I don't care. It was about them, not me or about anything else. It was about the words of Christ and how these guys respected it. And that's what we did. So basically it's up on YouTube if anybody wants to just watch it. It's on the Pinlight channel. It's just the Words Project, WORDZ project. And it's like an hour-long documentary in high definition. So, I just put it up for free because I thought, this is the time when we need this, when the black community, you got Black Lives Matter wanting to kill white people. It's like, well, that's not the way it should be. And if you watch the Words Project, maybe you get a different perspective. Hopefully, I'm hoping at least.
It's really good. It's really good.
Well, this has been an amazing interview with you guys. And we got about 5 minutes left. How can people get a hold of you, Richard? How does that work?
Well, if they're interested in getting a copy of the Torah Code film, that's at the official website, end2darkness.com. End like the end, to darkness.com. And on that website are a couple videos with Rabbi Glazerson that we did on Gematria that you can watch. There's the trailer to the Torah codes there, and I've got it up there every way conceivably someone might want to get a copy of it. If you want to rent it on Vimeo, you can. If you want to buy a digital download from Vimeo, you can do that. If you want a hard copy on Blu-ray, you can get that through Amazon. There's a button linking you to that. Or if you just want a regular old DVD of it, you can order that too. And people are still purchasing them, which is good because I think people need to know what the codes are about and would like to do another film if we ever can raise the funds to do it.
Mm-hmm. Larry, how about you? How can they find you?
Yeah, mine's very simple. It's LarryWTaylor.org. That's LarryWTaylor.org, and just you can go there and follow the blogs, the alerts, and all the data. And matter of fact, I post a number of things of Richard every week. Something about Richard or L.A. or something they're doing there's a note of news about it, and I try to keep up with him. Richard, man, you're great. I appreciate you so much. You've explained so much tonight. We could almost makes me want to do about 10 hours, but I know we don't have the time. Thank you.
Yeah, I would hear snoring coming from this vast audience here any moment that happens.
I wanted to ask one question before we close this out. When you were doing the Watcher series, did the name Bob Lazar ever come up?
Oh, of course. In fact, last year I went and heard him speak in person at the International UFO Congress in Phoenix, near Phoenix, and he said it's the first time I'd ever actually seen this guy in the flesh, and it was really fascinating. I believe him. I don't think he's making this story up. I believe him. Oh, I forgot to mention that just my website is pinlight.com. If someone's interested in Watchers, they can get it through there, and that'll take you to Marzulli's site and all of that. But pinlight.com. Sorry, I should have said that earlier.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I believe Bob Lazar, too. In fact, I saw an interview he just did not too long ago, and he said he was just very sorry that he'd ever gotten involved in it. But he thought
that's what he told
was
us.
Doing people a favor.
Yeah, and there's a new guy out. Have you heard of Corey Good?
No. The name rings a bell, but enlighten me.
He's been on Coast to Coast AM with our friend George Norrie a couple of times. I have told L.A. that I thought Corey was the new Bob Lazar.
Uh-huh.
He seems to know a lot of information about the Black Ops space program and can describe it just right off the top of his head without any trouble, which usually when someone is that erudite, they're not making it up.
Mm-hmm. Well, the TR-3Bs and all of that, I know we're way advanced to what the general public's being told. And you're familiar with Project.
Roger used to tell me that, too.
Yeah.
Roger Lear used to tell me that. He seemed to know as well.
You've heard of Project Bluebeam, obviously, too, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean,
well, there's another one. They killed him. He was murdered. So that's the way it goes. Well, thank you all for coming on for this show. And, boy, it's been just fascinating. Great. Hope we can have you all back.
Bet.
We'll have to do that.
Take
it's
care.
A privilege. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.